My guest tonight, Preston Dennett, is going to be talking about undersea UFO bases. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Hope you had a great day back to work. At least for some of you. Some people were off for 3 days last weekend. Anyway, welcome. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts paranormal investigation team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state here, and that means if you have a paranormal issue, we can get to you. It may take us a couple days, and in that case, we do have mediums and psychics on staff who can help you with that. They'll call you and talk to you about what may or may not be going on, and if it is paranormal, in most cases, they can settle down the energy, and that works out for us because then we get out there and we can just do our thing for you. Anyway, if you want to find us, you can find us all over the internet. Just Google California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team or California Haunts Radio. You can find us, all right? That being said, if you're watching from Facebook tonight, and a lot of you are, and you haven't done so already, please hit that follow button if you like what you see. Same thing with YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, please feel free to do that. We're always looking for new people to join us. I'm always really active on all my social media. And for this, next thing I'm going to tell you works for all social media places, okay? Be sure, if you like what you hear and everything, not only to follow or subscribe, but to show us some love, send us some hearts, some likes, some thumbs up, and things like that. And also, chat in our chat room, because what that does is there's an FYP, and the FYP is within the computer, and the computer triggers on that. And if they see a lot of activity going on for a particular show, they will put the show out to more people, okay? So more people get to see us. So, like I said, it works for everywhere else because, we're not only beaming, or I call it beaming, but we're not only beaming ourselves to Facebook and YouTube, we are also going out to Twitch and TikTok and some other places tonight. So that would help us greatly. Anyway, my guest tonight's been on before. I love talking with this gentleman. He's always got so much stuff to talk about. Oh, my gosh. And tonight, it's something that I've been following for a while, and it's undersea UFO bases. And I know there's this thing going on that people talk about that's actually going on off of Malibu, where people have seen UFOs and stuff taking going in and out of the water. So I'm curious to see what he has to say about this. He's got a book out about it. Let me get him on so we can get this show going because it's going to be a good one. Here we go. Hello, Preston.
Hi, Charlotte. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, not bad. Keeping busy, having fun.
I see you've got a lot of books out now.
Yeah, somebody's got to stop me because I cannot stop myself. I love doing it. It's a lot of fun, but once this subject, I should say, grabs you, it's hard to let go. It's, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Once you're into the UFO club, you're a lifetime member.
Yep. That's it. It's like a drug. It's kind of like when I first became a photographer, too. It was like being on crack because the equipment, there's something that's never good enough, so you're forever buying more and more and more and trying to make more and more and more of it. You know what I mean? It's crazy. It's just crazy. Absolutely. I understand. So for the people who don't know about you, can we get a short synopsis?
Sure. Let's see. I am number 5 of 6 kids. Moved from Illinois to California when I was about 7 years old. Grew up pretty skeptical of this subject. Well, very skeptical. What am I saying? I did not believe in UFOs or anything paranormal, which all changed in 1986. I was 21 years old. Heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska, which led to me asking my brother about a UFO sighting he claimed to have had a few years earlier. And he described this incredible sighting of a metallic disc. colored lights on it, a dome on top, silent, treetop level. He chased it in his car with his two friends. So that opened the door for me to look into this. Found out a lot of people I knew, people I loved and trusted, were keeping secrets from me. I mean, they were not telling me about their amazing encounters. That's what got me to join MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and start buying books on this subject. I was going to disprove it. That was my goal. I totally failed with that. Turned out the evidence was pretty much undeniable even way back then. So I became a field investigator for MUFON, started interviewing people, soon started writing articles for local magazines and journals and newspapers. Wrote about 30 of them, and that took about 10 years. I was real into this right off the bat. In 1996, I got my first book, UFO Healings, followed by one every year pretty much. Extraterrestrial visitations, UFOs over California, some books on ghosts and stuff, because I started to realize this was all related. Eventually on Bigfoot as well, levitation. Eventually one on USOs as well. I got reports of those from the beginning.
Well, you know what? I've read some of your books. They're great. They're well written, understandable. I'm like, I'm like you said earlier, I love this topic, and so I have books behind me, as you guys can't see, but I've got bookshelves and bookshelves full of this topic behind me. It's just so intriguing to me because I don't know if I've been abducted. I may have been a contactee at some point, but all I know is I remember seeing different types of craft when I was a kid. Oof. At least three times. That's
a big red flag, Charlotte. Once is one thing. Twice, that's even another. But 3 times? Yeah, that's one of the things I ask about repeated encounters. And if they're close up.
The last one I saw was probably, maybe like 11 years ago, somewhere around that. I was driving home, and it was a kind of cloudy night, but it was a strange cloudy. It was just cloudy night. And I remember looking up, and I saw this light in the cloud. I didn't see a craft. I saw a light in the cloud. But the light went straight up.
All right. That's not a shooting star. They come the other direction.
That's not one of ours unless it's a chopper going really fast. So,
interesting.
That was the last one. That's the last time I saw anything like that. But I have had multiple sightings of weird things.
Yeah, I started having sightings myself after I investigated. I grew up in an area that's a pretty active hotspot. Never saw anything. I was outside a lot too. Maybe not so much at night when it really is, more noticeable, I guess, more active. But yeah, I never saw anything until I started looking, and I did. I sure had a number of sightings over the years.
I've even I don't know if I went through a time warp, but I have had a loss of time as well.
Me too. At least one.
At least one, yeah. At least one. So tell me about UFOs that are under the ocean.
Yeah, USOs, unidentified submersible object.
Yes.
Or submerged, some people call it, which are basic. I mean, let's face it, they're the same as UFOs. But you really can't call them that when they're not flying anymore. They're swimming, or floating, I guess, unidentified floating objects. But yeah, from the beginning, I started to get reports of these and had no idea really that this stretch of coastline off the coast of Southern California is one of the top producers of what we would call USOs in the world. I mean, it's right up there in the top 10, seriously. And, I'm certainly not the first to document it, but I did start getting cases as soon as I looked into it and found out that researchers like Ann Druffel, who is SoCal-based, she was getting reports. I mean, she saw one when she was a little kid back in I think it was the 30s, 40s. But really, throughout the 70s, was getting all kinds of cases. And actually wrote to MUFON a big letter saying, we need to put up cameras in this area. There's all kinds of stuff going on. 24-hour surveillance of this area could really prove to be, have a lot of pay dirt. So she was the first, but I found out that Bill Hamilton, he had a bunch of cases. Yvonne Smith, Barbara Lamb, Robert Stanley. I was a latecomer, honestly. But yeah, I started documenting him because I'll always remember the first one, Charlotte, that really got me kind of scratching my head was this therapist I had interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
It's always nice when you get a professional. Not that, any witness is better than another, but she was very intelligent and very outgoing, super psychic. I ended up interviewing her about her own encounters
Mm-hmm.
in terms of direct contact. But she was driving along the Pacific Coast Highway. Now, this is right outside of LA, goes along the Southern California coast. It's a very well-known stretch of highway. And at this point, Charlotte, you can't go a mile where I can't pinpoint an encounter like, here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. And she was driving along Santa Monica, right along the coast there. It's a beautiful drive, by the way. And she wasn't driving, her friend was. She's looking out at this object on the water. This is in the Santa Catalina San Pedro Channel.
Mm-hmm.
And she's looking at it thinking, well, that looks a little strange.
Mm-hmm.
This was during the day. And she's looking at it and it was all lit up. It was this big, bright, round, white light. And, boats usually have various lights on them. And you can see a structure. She couldn't see any structure, but it was big. And so she's looking at it, and decides, this is strange, and points it out to her friend who was driving. And this is what really kind of blew my mind. She says the second he turned to look at it, this thing went straight up, boom.
Wow.
So she certainly felt like there was some sort of synchronicity or even telepathic contact. Went straight up, disappeared, super fast. She's like, how do you describe that? I mean, what could account for that? I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. That was the first one. I remember the second one too. It was a gentleman who was a doctor, actually. And he had a house right on the coast on Malibu. Literally would be hit by a tsunami. It's the tiniest wave. I mean, it was on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
Really nice, expensive homes there. Wow. I used to do carpet cleaning and would go into those homes and carpet clean them. So I'm very familiar with the area. And he was looking out one evening and saw what he thought was a boat on fire, but it didn't look right. There weren't any flames, really. It was just this really kind of prismatic
Mm-hmm.
light. And he said it was so unusual because it would flash these vivid blues and reds and greens and yellows. Says it was really beautiful. And after watching it, he finally just called up the Coast Guard. Said, I think there's something out there. Maybe it's a boat on fire. And they were pretty dismissive. They said, you're probably looking at squid fishermen
Mm-hmm.
who do, shine lights to bring up the fish. And he's familiar with that. He's like, no, that's not this. And when it became clear he was describing something that was a little unusual, it basically ended the call because he's trying to get them to send something out there. And
Right.
Doing that. So I wonder if they get a lot of calls, honestly. Because I know the police station in that area gets a bunch. I mean, I found out through a very backdoor way because I called them. They said, oh, yeah, we occasionally get calls.
Mm-hmm.
No, they get over 100 a year.
Wow.
Yeah. You know how I found out?
How'd you find out?
It was amazing because I was interviewing this guy who'd had an encounter. He's like, I have to tell you something. He described his encounter, which was in the canyon area, not really on the coast. So
Mm-hmm.
this is a bit of an aside, but it's interesting because he's like, I went to this party where there was a police officer who works at the station. And the subject of UFOs came up, and he's like, oh, yeah, we get like 200-300 calls a year. And he's telling me this. I'm like, no. You must have misunderstood. 300 calls over a decade or something. He's like, no. I don't know what he said. And I kind of took it with a grain of salt because it's easy to misunderstand. And that just sounded like too much to me. But short time later, that same year, I was interviewing another person real close to the coast. I would say about 3 miles away, who had a sighting of a classic saucer moving out towards the ocean. little lights all around it, a giant multicolored UFO. Well, the lights were multicolored. Real low, totally silent. And she's describing this, and she's like, "Oh, I've got something else to tell you. I went to this dinner party." I'm like, "You did?" And she's like, "Yeah, and there was a police officer there. He started talking about UFOs." I'm like, "He did?" And I quickly realized this was the same dinner party because she said the same thing. She said, "He said we receive hundreds of calls a year." So yeah, I think there's a lot of calls being made to officials, and they basically cover it up, I guess. There's no other word.
Because they can't explain it. Doesn't this go back way back in history, these sightings? Because I know Christopher Columbus, there were reports when they were crossing through the Sargasso Sea that they were seeing lights underneath the water as well.
Yeah, as far as I know, that's one of the earliest recorded, really well documented, I should say, USO sightings. And yeah, that's quite some time ago, 1400s. Really interesting. It is worldwide. It does go way back. Really got no attention for decades. Since the modern age of UFOs in 1947, even then people weren't talking about them. Really, the only researcher to touch it was Ivan Sanderson, who wrote a book, Invisible Residents, which covered it in a little bit. I think Charles Fort also listed a few cases, but he was all over the map in terms of the unexplained. And no one was talking about it for a long time. Finally, Carl Feint, he started a website and eventually wrote a book called Water UFOs. He was the go-to guy for a long time. He's now passed on. But I started, documenting all these cases along the coastline. Here's another real interesting one. I love this one. I don't think I've ever talked about it on the radio before, but it comes to mind because it's such a close-up sighting. His name was George. He worked on the Star Trek set, of all things, and was driving down the freeway, moving, and saw what he thought was a helicopter way off in the distance. But as he's looking at it, it darts like 30 miles. He's like, "Whoa!" It's darting around, right? And he kind of called out to it. He's like, "Hey, if you're unusual, I'd like to see you more close up." And this thing, he's on the Santa Monica Freeway heading through the McClure Tunnel onto the Pacific Coast Highway. If anyone knows this area, they know about this exact location. It's down the California Incline, and you hit the Pacific Coast Highway right there. Well, he gets right down onto the Pacific Coast Highway, and this object is hovering right over the beach, right on the beach there. It's sending down pencil-thin, multicolored beams of pastel light. Said it was really beautiful. He got out of his car. He's looking at it. It was a silver disc, and it was shining on the water where the water's wet from the oceans. Not a standard USO in terms of it being in the water or anything, but on the beach. And he said he had a distinct telepathic connection to it. I was getting a lot of those kinds of cases. So yeah, that area is super active.
I think what people don't realize, and I have flown from Los Angeles to Hawaii. I've flown from San Francisco to Hawaii. And what people don't realize, because they've never done it, is the minute you leave LA or San Francisco and you look back, how steep the cutoff is. And how deep it is out there. Because, to stand over the ocean on those cliffs out there, it doesn't hit you until you look back.
Yep.
So that is a deep, deep area where anything could be hiding underneath that water.
Yeah, I looked into that actually because I was curious. I really wanted to do my research and wanted to know the geography and geology of that area. And I was surprised that it's that deep. It's actually got an average depth of about 2,000 to 3,000 feet.
Yep.
In the channel there. Catalina Island's about 26 miles at its closest point. And you can see it easily on a clear day. It doesn't look like it's 26 miles out there, but it is. And the water in between that and the mainland at parts is up to a mile deep because there's this trench that runs all the way up and actually becomes the Monterey Trench, which is one of the deepest trenches in the ocean. It's not like the Mariana Trench
No, well,
by
yeah.
any means, but it's up to a mile deep in parts, 5,000 feet. And that area, and this is true for the mountains, the Santa Monica Mountains, one of the only transverse ranges facing in that direction, which is really unusual, has a lot of caves, an enormous number of caves. It's very well known for its caves. And I talked to this one guy who was a submarine navigator. He had this incredible encounter while basically captaining a boat up for a very rich guy up the coast. And it was a dark, stormy night as he's taken this boat up the coastline and was on the northern edge of this whole area and saw this object in front of them on the water. Well, actually, it was to the right. And he's like, well, that's odd because as a navigator, he's very familiar with hazards. And you can't take a boat in this water because it's far too shallow. And there's all kind of rock outcroppings. And he's looking at it thinking, who the heck would take a boat out there because they are stupid. They will crash. And suddenly, he says, I don't know how this happened, but this thing was right in front of their boat. They did not see it move. It was just there. And this is on the water. And so at this point, they're freaking out. And this is when their depth sounder starts reading that they are in about 20 feet of water. They know they're not. They're pretty sure they're not because they were just seconds ago. Fine, a good quarter, half mile off the coastline. And so everything goes crazy at this point. And they're immediately turn out to sea to just make sure that they're okay. And finally, they calm down and they realize that this thing that was directly in front of them is now approaching their boat. And they're freaking out because it's less than a quarter mile away. And you don't do that when you're at sea. You leave a mile distance because it's very easy to misread and you both turn in and boom, you crash. That's what happened with the Andrea Doria. They both thought they were turning the other and they ended up colliding right into each other. So this is well known to anyone who, pilots a boat. So they watch, they stop. They're like, we're not doing anything. And this darn thing comes right alongside them. And he said it was a bank of stadium lights. He says, listen, Preston, I'm pretty familiar with ships, boats, aircraft. He's a submarine navigator. And he says, this was nothing I'd ever seen before. It was really quite frightening. These were very bright lights, so bright you could hardly look at them. The other guy was freaking out as well. And it just stayed there. It's kind of stopped. And that really freaked them out to the point where they left. They're like, we're leaving. And they left it off into the distance, and it was still there.
Wow.
But he told me, like, oh, yeah, there are deep, deep canyons down there. So there's all kinds of places people could hide, if you had the craft that could do that. But it's so interesting.
And why not? I mean, there's the stories about, what's going on beneath Mount Shasta and some of the larger mountains, on land. So why not be able to hide down there, in those trenches?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of speculation as to why. And speculation is one thing if it's not backed up by, firsthand evidence of like, why are they doing this? Why is this area so active? Because the first thing I did was I started plotting all these things on a map.
Right.
Mind you, I had 150. It's now probably closer to 200, 300. Yeah, I'll say 200 just to be conservative. But yeah, hundreds of documented reports, which I put on a map, and boy, they're real black around the Malibu area, but all just thick through the Santa Catalina Channel, scattered, and something's going on there. And people are like, well, maybe there's a base, maybe they're using water for fuel. I couldn't point to anything directly proving that. But as more and more, as I interviewed more contactees, someone would report that being on craft when it goes in the water. I wrote a book about a lady by the name of Dolly Safran.
Right.
who I've probably talked about before because she is my go-to gal. She's had a lot of experiences. She's a fully conscious contactee. She says, I can tell you what's going on. I'm like, okay. She says, the thing is, these craft are very hot when they come in. And we know this because there's plasma fields surrounding it.
Oh, of course, of course, of course.
One lady I interviewed, she's like, it was this fiery ball. She's in Topanga, in the same area. It's a fiery ball of light. It came down and actually landed or hovered like 3 feet right outside their house and lit up like a Christmas tree with colored lights. But she said this thing was metallic. It looked like a fiery ball until it came down.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a number of reports of that. They're very hot. And so what they do is they go underwater to basically cool off because the temperatures, can be problematic, especially if you're reaching out to contact someone.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But it makes sense because, I mean, our own rockets, our own spacecraft, over the years, even the space shuttle had heat tiles on the space shuttle to deflect that heat when they were coming in. They even talk about it, the Apollo, moon landings, the guys that came back, because they had to have heat shields as they were coming down.
It's a huge engineering problem that they finally solved with these kind of ceramic, I think they're ceramic tiles,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which, as we know, can withstand very high heat levels.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's probably what's going on in terms of why is it so active? I don't know. I can't say for sure, other than we have a very large population base in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps they're coming for people and they're doing their thing and they're down there because they can do their thing, and we can't get down there in the way they can.
No.
We have submarines that mosey along at 30, 40, well, faster if you talk to the top secret folks.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly nothing that these things can do. Because there was one report of a guy whose house overlooks the coast, the Chart House restaurant, Topanga Beach, Santa Monica Beach.
Mm-hmm.
They saw these lights under the water, and they were darting around just like these objects in the sky, hundreds of miles per hour, from coastline, back and forth at super high speed. There's something going on down there. Bill Hamilton, he had a report, which was off the coast of the old Marineland. There used to be a resort, what do you call it? An amusement park type thing with the Shamu, the killer whale, and all of that, SeaWorld type thing.
Right.
Right off the coast there. And it closed down eventually, but he had a report from some witnesses who were in that area and saw a very large craft, which was releasing smaller craft underwater. And there's a lot of reports like that. I was on a radio show once talking about this, and a guy called in. He's like, I have to tell you what happened to me in Santa Barbara. This is the northern end. And his case was so interesting because he described how he was in his boat, not far off the coast, in fairly shallow water, a couple of 100 feet, maybe 300. And he kept seeing what he thought were whales or some large fish coming up and then going down. He couldn't get a good look at them. They were grayish. Mm-hmm. So he's very interested because he kept seeing them. It's not just one or two, it's a lot, or one keep coming up and down. Finally, one comes up real close, and it's a round disc.
Wow.
And he's like, oh my gosh, that's not a whale. It's not a whale. He said it was absolutely a hard, edged metallic craft of some kind. Totally silent, wasn't making any ripples or anything like this. But it's case after case after case after case. So
I have heard that there's Google Earth photos of structures underneath the water in that area.
Yes, there is. The Malibu anomaly. I understand, and I have not verified this. It's been recently airbrushed out or, pixelated. But the Malibu anomaly was something brought to my attention by a researcher who, pointed it out to me and says, you're doing USO research. You should check this out. And I did. And it was this very flat, smooth area that looked unusual because you could almost see what looked like pillars Robert Stanley, he also pointed out, he was really the first researcher to like, something could be going on here, because he's found what he thought were structures in the mountains. And I looked at them, and I'm a skeptical, I'm sort of skeptically minded. Finding out UFOs were real, ironically, made me a bit more of a skeptic, because I was lied to about it by family members, not lied to, but withheld information, and our government. So I became much more discerning in that regard. But then, Jimmy Church was contacted about it, and he used Google applications to sort of get a side view of it, which is, questionable to some degree. There are some Google images that show this. It's massive. It's about 2,000 feet down. It's got this thick, flat roof. It looks like a Parthenon or the Capitol. It's got giant pillars, which are fairly weathered and look somewhat even, not perfectly, but it looks like there's a tunnel there. It really does in a good number of these images. Some don't. Some show what looks more like a landslide. I researched it as a skeptic and as kind of looking at it from both sides, as well as, of course, being as objective as possible. But I was intrigued because this is where all those little dots I plotted on the map were really clustered around. I'm like, gosh, I wonder if there's something in this area. And sure enough, there is. And it's called Sycamore Knoll for geologists. It's a thrust earthquake fault. And yeah, it's massive. It's got a very smooth top, pillars, and what looks like a tunnel. It looks artificial at first glance. It's very intriguing. And I was kind of remained there on the fence because I'm like, I just don't know. I think it's probably a structure, but gosh, it's deep down there. Who would build it? It's so big. And, what was that show, Location, with Rob Lowe and his sons?
Yes, when he went, yeah.
Did you see that?
Yes, I did. I was thinking about that when we first started the interview.
I'm like, they're going to go down there and we're going to see what it is. And of course, they had a shoestring budget and a few hours to do it, and didn't see anything and couldn't get any real proof. No one's gone down there as far as I know before or since. So we don't know what it is. But I did get some interesting information that isn't in the book I wrote on this. Because I interviewed, of all people, and I'm so blessed, Merrill Fankhauser. So for all of you musician fans, you'll recognize his name as the author of that song Wipeout.
Yes.
And he didn't see anything, but he said he told me he had the opportunity to go down and view, quote, the lights coming in and out of the water, because his friends were watching these. This is something families would do. They go down to the beach and just watch the objects coming in and out of the water. And he regrets it to this day that he didn't take that opportunity to go do it, because they saw them, sure enough. But he recontacted me after I got that story from him, because he became super interested, because there was another guy who was detecting some weird beeping sound coming from that same area that he could not pinpoint, but eventually he's a radio ham, and he pinpointed it somewhere in that area. And Merrill Fankhauser was using it in his latest musical composition. But at any rate, so he contacts me a year or two after the book is out and says, I need to tell you something. I was in Las Vegas. I was promoting my album. Met this Chumash Indian elder, Native American. The Gabrielano Indians, the Chumash tribe, lived along the coastline for, I think it's 2,000-3,000 years going back, and have a long oral tradition, of course. And he started talking to this Native American elder about UFOs in this area. And the elder's like, oh, yeah, we know about that. And he's like, well, do you know about the Malibu anomaly? And the elder said, yes, we didn't build it. We don't know who built it. But we do know that the ocean level used to be much lower. And our tribe would actually sit off the edge of this thing and go fishing. So I thought that was super interesting because the implication was clear that no, we didn't build it, but somebody did. So I don't know. I'm not prepared to say this is a base or anything.
Right.
To be
Well,
honest.
I mean, it stands to reason because there have been caves going into continents forever. I mean, look at Argentina. When you think back to the end of World War II, when the Germans supposedly had caves, going into Argentina to get the Nazis out. To put the Nazis into Argentina. So, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, that they would be able to do that.
Yeah, well, it's certainly interesting to say the least. And, in 1992, there was a huge wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon, which is kind of what led me more and more to researching the coastal area. Because on June 14th, 1992, bunches of people all over this canyon saw UFOs. I mean, I counted it recently. It's like 30 or 40 witnesses, groups of 2, 3, up to 5, all in separate areas, seeing UFOs. I think there were 5 cars going up and down the boulevard there, which runs right through the canyon, and they were all chased. One guy was woken up in his home when a UFO came right down and hovered over it. Other people saw beams of light coming down. But one couple, I mean, there was a lot of reports. I could spend a whole hour on just that night. But there was this couple I interviewed who were friends of friends, because I started putting feelers out. I live in the canyon. I know a lot of people there.
Right.
I called the police. I called the newspaper. I did cold calling. I was going door to door. I was putting up flyers. I was going to find out what's going on. And I found this couple who I call Daniel and Catherine, who live on Saddle Peak, it's called, which overlooks the ocean, the canyon, the San Fernando Valley. And they were drawn outside that night, just at darkness, at dusk, by flashes of light, went outside and saw these lights coming up from behind the ridge, right down by the ocean. And they're like, wow, what is that? And they all darted off. And they're like, gosh, that looked strange. Went back inside. They were watching the movie. The dog's barking, more flashes of light. They run outside, 10, 20 objects come up from the same place. I know exactly where it is. I went up there. I ended up interviewing someone else who was on the other side and saw it as well. Objects coming up right towards the ocean, real close. Probably perhaps out of the ocean, honestly. And I'll get to that in a second. But Daniel and Catherine, after it happened the third time, they're like, well, let's count these. Well, she did. Because they were freaking out. I mean, they called the police in a panic, and the police were like, we know nothing. That was a lie. They had received calls the previous night, and they lied to this couple. And it was unfortunate. I don't know why. I have some sympathy because it must be a real bear to deal with all of these reports coming in. But they counted, this went on for 2 hours, 3. They actually went inside. They were like, they shut the door. They drew the curtains. They're like, I'm not doing this anymore. She was so upset because she counted 200 objects.
Jeez.
It's a lot, right?
That's a lot, yeah.
So they're telling me, I'm like, gosh, they're coming. And when someone sees a UFO, almost always, they're like, well, I looked up and it came from above. It was this dot of light. It was a starlight light, or it came from the horizon. And she's like, no. These are coming from below. And I'm like, gosh, that is weird. I don't get reports like this. What is going on? And later, I got another report because it's amazing how word spreads. And if you're known in the area, this guy was down on the beach in Venice. And he heard this rush of water, like a waterfall, like Niagara Falls water. And he whirls around and looks at the beach, the water. And there's scattered people, 5 or 10. And this enormous, he says it was the size of a stadium, comes up out of the water. And that's what's coming off of, that's what's making the water sound. Just waterfalls coming off. He says there were little objects flying around it. He says they looked like gnats. I'm like, well, how little are you talking? He's like, well, probably they were the size of small planes. I don't know. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, there probably was 20, 30 of them. And there's this very large object. And as soon as it rose up, he says they went swoosh, whoosh. in a matter of 3 seconds, right up the coast and gone. And he turned and he saw the airport, which is right there, LAX.
Right.
International is right there. And he said all the planes immediately went and came in for landing, and there was no outgoing aircraft for an hour or two, which is super unusual. And I looked into LAX. Boy, that has a history of encounters. Brazen, where they're coming right in full view of the watchtower. Not every year, but every couple of years, a major sighting right over LAX. I mean, I ended up putting a whole chapter on just the LAX sightings. So I don't know. If there's a parking lot down there. Sometimes there's a lot of craft down there, because I've got other cases where there's 20, 30 objects coming up. Or, well, even more. In another case involved like 200. But one that really intrigues me real quick, because it's different, is this couple was walking along. I think this was Morro Beach. Again,
I love Morro Bay. Yes.
Yeah, that area. And they're walking along the beach, a boyfriend and girlfriend. And he's like, look, I didn't know they had light buoys out here. And she's like, oh, yeah. And they're looking at them because they looked strange. Buoys with lights on them, which is a thing. I've never seen any out there. So they were looking at them trying to, like, gosh, that's strange. And of course they weren't light buoys, because one went up and then another, and then ding, 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 ding. There must have been 10 or 20 of them. And off they went on their merry way. Unidentified floating objects in that case. Crazy.
Do you think this means that, some of these craft that we are seeing in the skies at night, that the possibility is that because, who knows how long it takes for them to get from wherever they are to here? So do you think that these bases or whatever they have underneath the ocean are where these crafts are going? And then they're stationed here, just like our military. We have people stationed all over. That they're stationing these craft here, and that's what they're doing instead of flying back and forth to whatever planet.
Well, that was my initial assessment. And I kind of backed off from that, because I don't have any good evidence of it. I mean, this may have been true in the past, but I talked to Dolly Safran about this, and she's like, no, they really don't have bases. They don't have bases underwater. And I'm like, well, wait a second, because there are people who were taken on board a craft, and they said they look out and they see water. Well, you might perceive something as a base, when in fact it's not. It's just a large craft. So it's hard to say for sure, but the evidence is leading me away from the theory of bases in the way that we would think of it. But yeah, certainly these craft are going in and out of the water because they can. They are and I'm not sure I really like this term, but transmedium. I mean, they're going around in space. They're in our atmosphere, and they can go in and out of the water, and frankly, through solid objects. I mean, there's cases of UFOs flying through trees, not around, into the ground. I've got first-hand cases of that. The guy in Fresno said, I'm telling you, this thing went into the ground. The ground looked like it opened up, and in it went. And I've talked to another guy I talked to. He was from West Virginia. He was on board when they did that. He freaked out, and they're like, no, it's okay. We can do this. We're fine. So yeah, they have that ability, and I think they're there for possibly two reasons. And I hate to speculate, but my assessment, I should say, is that they're going down to cool off, because certainly there's a lot of cases of that where they come down and they land on the water and steam's coming off, and then off they go right away. It's like, why would you just come down and off you go? Unless to cool off. Or, you know what? Let's just go down there. We've got a person on board. We're going to heal them. We're going to counsel them. We're going to do what we do. Warn them about nuclear proliferation and pollution. They've got their agenda. I think we've got a good handle on what it is. It's not nefarious. It's good news. Honestly, that's my assessment based on, I'm not speculating here. I can pull out the first-hand cases to say this is their agenda. this is their goal. This is why they're coming here, I think. So I think that's what they're doing. And one of them is certainly to let people know they're there. And this is shown really dramatically in a number of these USO cases where people are on boats. Here's a good example. An electronic engineer had taken his boat out, and this is sort of in the middle of all this activity. And he sees this green glow ahead of him. And he's like, well, what the heck is that? It's a foggy night. So he stops his boat. It's an expensive yacht and fully equipped. And this darn thing, he says, makes a beeline for his boat. Now, could not be a coincidence. I mean, it's targeting him. There's no doubt in his mind because it sees him and it's coming. And it goes right under his boat. And it's a big, round, green light. And his depth sounder read, it was like 100 feet. I have to look it up, but it wasn't deep. As soon as he read that, his depth sounders quit functioning. His electronics went off. His compass, he had 2 compasses, started spinning. One went right off its mounting. He said it was really actually frightening because it was bigger than his boat. And he doesn't know what they're up to.
Right.
But I do, because I've collected enough cases that I think I can confidently say that they're just saying, we're here. You need to know that you're not alone, because case after case after case after case, I've got about a dozen, not quite, of what I would call targeting of boats. And there's not one single case where anyone's hurt or harmed in any way. They're just going there and saying, hello. And over on top of the boats, for that matter. So that, to me, speaks volumes.
Well, as you say, I've had relatives that live there in that area. It is a very populated area, so if you want to make your presence known, that's a great place to do it.
Yeah, and I really need to put out another edition of the book because I just keep getting reports. And I've become a better researcher. I found a lot of databases, a lot of newspaper articles. I'm like, gosh, I might need to put out a part 2 because that area, there's something to it. And it's strange to me because, our population on Earth is largely clustered around coastal areas.
Right.
We love water. And so there should be, just statistically speaking, a lot more sightings all over the world. And while there is, it's not like here in Southern California, I should say. I did get a lot of reports from people all over the world, and some are so amazing. Can I tell you one?
Sure. Well, yeah, I was going to ask you, why, years ago, I remember when I first started reading up on these things, why were there so many reports out of Brazil?
Yeah, well, Brazil, I think, has become a little bit more open than other countries. I think everyone is getting encounters. I think it's saturated, and most of it does not reach mainstream media. The vast majority of witnesses do not talk. Our governments, our secret governments, our military have a very well-funded, very well-orchestrated, very brutal campaign, mission to cover this up. Hoaxes, hallucinations, misperceptions. That's all there is. There's nothing to it. Go away. You're an idiot if you think you saw a UFO. You're on drugs. When Blue Book would ever get a really good case, they would attack the witness. Whenever they got something that they knew was Venus, they're like, let's publicize it. Let's go there. Let's interview the witness. Let's push this agenda. That is their agenda. That's the ET threat to their control and enslavement and enforced ignorance of the population. But yeah, I'd love to share this one that involves a submarine if I could.
Go ahead.
Because it's a good one.
Go for it.
I was contacted by Ray Sachs, who is in his late 60s. He's like, you know what? I'd like to do my part for disclosure. I had this incident that happened when I was on the USS Clamagore. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, we carried nuclear torpedoes. Nobody knew that at the time, but we did. I'm like, well, hold on a second. Did you sign a disclosure, an NDA? He's like, no, I never did. They never said I couldn't talk, because he started telling me stuff like, maybe I shouldn't be hearing this.
Mm-hmm.
But he's like, no, I was an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore. I verified his employment. I verified everything he told me to the point that I could. And he, in 1971, was assigned as a lookout officer one evening on deck. The Clamagore was on the surface of the ocean going up the East Coast. This is kind of the North Carolina area heading up towards the north,
Mm-hmm.
about 6 miles off the coast or so, 4 or 6 miles. And another petty officer was also on watch, as was the second in command and the commander. Were all up there, 4 people, 4 men. And suddenly, this is at night, this object comes zooming in from the stern at an estimated 100 knots, Ray said, and starts pacing the submarine right next to it. Not like a mile away or a quarter mile, right off the side. It was this huge circle of white light. I'm like, well, how big? I couldn't tell you. It lit up the whole area of the submarine, and it was definitely a solid object because it was a defined light.
Mm-hmm.
But it was right, says it couldn't have been that deep. And the commander freaks out, and Ray Sachs, his job was to be in touch with the sonar room.
Mm-hmm.
And so he calls the sonar room and asks them, are you painting anything on sonar? We're like, no, we don't see anything. What are you talking about? He's like, never mind. Tells the captain, nope, they're not seeing anything. Maybe it's Captain Nemo. Captain did not think that was funny, the commander. Or no, he told the second in command, who told the commander. So they're jibber-jabbering, he and the other officer, petty officer, and the second in command's like, shut up, stop talking. And they're watching this thing, and he says, one by one, the major high-ranking people on that submarine came up on deck because they wanted to see it. They just wanted to look, see. No one, of course, could identify it. And it stayed there for 15 minutes as they're moving along at 6 knots or so, 12 knots. Yeah, 12 knots. And finally, they went back to deck. It was just the 4 of them. And this darn thing shoots off, not fully towards the bow, but off sort of perpendicular to the side at about 70 knots. Mind you, this is faster than submarines can go.
Mm-hmm.
And totally silent, not on sonar. And this is when the second in command turns to the captain, the commander. I know who he was, Commander Boyne. I looked it up, and says, sir, how would you like me to record this in the ship's log? And the commander, who's now passed on, says, officers who report this sort of event do not move up in rank. Basically a direct quote, according to the guy I interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't recorded. And I told this on another show. A submarine guy called in. He's like, yeah, you got this down. This is exactly what happened to me. They're not recorded. We see these things more often than you realize. They go way faster than we can go.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ray Sachs finally goes down below deck. The second in command says, you are not to talk about this with your fellow shipmates. And so he goes down below deck and is mobbed. It's like, why do I say, why do they? Everyone already knows. So he, of course, spills the beans. What's he going to do? It's like, people need to know this. Weird stuff happened on that ship. I'm like, what else happened? He says, well, we were booking along one time and the engine went out. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I mean, that can happen, right? He's like, no, that cannot happen because we have fail safes. There's no way, but everything just went out. And it was very scary because, this is a submarine. They're underwater. And yeah, nuclear tipped torpedoes, which is a huge red flag for me because I've interviewed a few Navy officers, some Army, it was an Army guy who was at Malmstrom. When that, they have the nuclear missiles. Anything nuclear is going to get a visit. And that's, I think, what was going on. It was another shame on you. What are you doing?
Mhm.
You know better. This is dangerous. And we're fully aware of what you're carrying. I think that was ultimately what the message was.
Mhm. Mhm.
What a case.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And we're finding out more and more because more officers are coming forward that this is not super rare or wasn't.
Mhm.
Gosh, if we're hearing about this one, can you imagine how often this is going on? Any denials by our Navy, Air Force, or Army are completely disingenuous, I should say.
Right. Disingenuous.
Uh, they are lying, and they know it at the highest levels. Maybe not the lower ranks, perhaps.
Right.
In the loop or in the know. And I think that's true for government in general. Some presidents probably aren't in the know. Some
Right.
senators and representatives and governors. Some are, some aren't. Some are a part of that shame on you group,
Right.
and others are like, I don't know.
Do you ever think there's going to be disclosure?
Not in the way people want it. No, because we're seeing all this action, and it's not action. It's talk.
Mhm.
It's another narrative. There's because if there would be disclosure, show us Roswell. Show us the
Mhm.
films of the landing at Edwards Air Force Base, the couple of them. Show us the gun camera footage from the 1950s onward. Not these little white dots that you're like takes you 20 minutes to stop frame. Who are
Right.
you kidding? No, I don't think they're going to tell the truth. They're not telling the truth now. 3 years ago, there was the first real congressional hearing where the heads of the Defense Department, Moultrie and Daley, were questioned over and over again by senators, most who clearly hadn't done their homework.
Mhm.
Some did. And I'm like, hey, this guy knows. He just mentioned Malmstrom.
Mhm.
And Moultrie and Daley said, we have no reporting on Malmstrom. I call liar on that one, because if you are the heads of the Defense Department, you are watching over every military base,
Mhm.
especially anything nuclear. You have to know about that.
Mhm.
So I can't prove that's lie, but I can prove that they lied on another answer, because they were asked, have we ever shot at these quote UAPs? I hate that
Mhm.
term, UAPs. They're UFOs. That's what we call them. We shouldn't even be calling them that. We should be calling them craft, because
Right.
we know that's what they are. They're, for Pete's sake, they're leaving burn marks on the ground. They've got windows. People are going on board them. They're craft, okay? It's ridiculous. But they were asked, have we ever shot at these things? And they said, no, real quick, a little bit too fast in my eyes. And I just almost threw something at the TV when I saw that, because I'm like, well, wait a second. What instantly came to mind was the Battle of LA,
Mhm.
1942, way back before the modern age. This is so well documented. There's declassified documents which show we shot 1,500 rounds of ammunition at a large object hovering over Culver City in full view of thousands of people. 5 people died from car accidents and heart attacks and falling debris. There was a blackout. It wasn't Japanese planes. It wasn't a balloon. There were searchlights trained on this object, and we shot at it. And I would point to anyone who really wants to know about this to Frank Ficino Jr.'s book, Shoot Them Down, because that was our policy throughout the 1950s until we started getting reprisals, because they'll defend themselves as
Right.
any sane person would. Uh, so, yeah, we shot at them. Have we ever? Yeah. In fact, I put a chapter in one of my books, UFO, don't shoot, because there's so many cases of people shooting handguns and rifles and just here on the ground.
Mhm.
Anyone who's done the research for a day knows this. Who are they kidding? No, we're not going to get disclosure, not from the US government, not in any full, transparent, truthful way. I expect
Mhm.
to get little dribs and drabs. I fully expect to get a piece of metal and some more blurry footage just to keep people happy.
Sure.
They have to control the narrative. They're losing control of it. That's the last thing they want. They've become irrelevant, not
Right.
credible. And my advice to them is full truth and transparency, or you are doomed and done for.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a revolution. I mean, it's going to collapse the government at some point under the weight of its own lies and greed, corruption. Governments don't last forever. You know, it's a real danger right now, I think, the pathway we're heading down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And history repeats itself. And if you look back through all the huge governments that were ever formed, they eventually collapsed for one reason or another.
Yep. And that's what we're looking at. And this is why I find it so interesting, because if you talk to the contactees, and that's my favorite area of research, because these are the people who are talking to the ETs, who are getting the messages. All these contactees are moving off grid. They're collecting food and water. They're ready for what the ETs have been warning about for a very long time, since the modern age, since nuclear power and weapons started being exploded. ETs came down, pulled people on board and said, listen, we have a message. Nuclear proliferation is going to lead to the extinction of all life on Earth if you're not careful. You are cutting down your forests. Stop it. You're polluting your water, your food. The war and aggression is going to cause all kinds of corruption. This is what they're warning against over and over. And upcoming existential events as well. I'm working on symmetry too with Dolly Safran. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this in the coronal mass ejections, CMEs, and the potential for the sun to micronova and all the stuff we're facing. It's for real. And I always tell people, don't believe me. I wish you wouldn't. I really wish people would, take the information that they're getting and vet it, verify it, do your own research. Don't believe our lying governments. I encourage people to talk to everyone you love and trust, your circle. Ask them, have any of you had an encounter? I think you'll be surprised. And at least one of them is going to say, well, okay, shut the door. Let's talk. And we'll describe how they've been pulled on board and gotten these messages. It's not uncommon. Contact is far, far more common than we're being led to believe.
It's kind of like, what was it, 12 years ago with ghost sightings as well. People weren't as open about it as they are now. Yeah. Now you can walk into a store and pick up a conversation with anybody, and they don't look at you like you're some kind of alien, right? Because you're talking about this stuff. Because now everybody is more relaxed to talk about it.
Yeah, ghosts aren't a mystery. Are you kidding me? They are documented for 1,000 years into prehistory.
Absolutely.
I mean, it makes zero sense for people to say, "Oh, this is unexplained." Well, there's things we don't understand. We don't understand most things. Everything's about the human body and the earth and the stars. I mean, there's, quote, mysteries, answers that need, questions that need answering. Ghosts.
Oh, that's right. That's what I mean. That's what this USO UFO phenomenon thing reminds me of now, because people are so much more open to it. Like you say, you can talk to just about anybody, and somebody may have had an experience, and they're more open to tell you about it, which years and years ago they weren't.
It's really time for a semantic overhaul. I keep calling it the phenomena, and I'm like, gosh, should we really be calling it, a mystery? Why are we calling them UFOs? Why are we calling them UAPs? Let's overhaul the language on this and start saying, well, that's one thing I really wish, if we could just get the major researchers out there to come together with a real honest to God conference. That's not everyone saying, well, this, no, this, no, this, no, this, no, this. Let's get a consensus. What can we agree upon? And what can we prove? Because the evidence is there. The evidence is absolutely there. The photographic evidence, the landing trace evidence, the medical evidence, the healing cases alone are conclusive. Honestly, they really are. Angel hair, the spider web-like substance that is, comes off of UFOs. It's the plasma fields again that's interacting with the atmosphere. That's been collected in laboratories, studied. It's good physical evidence. The implant evidence, for Pete's sake. The electromagnetic effects, the animal reactions. Linda Zimmerman, one of the few researchers, which I can count on, both hands, that I really love. She does good, honest, fact-based research. Put out the first book ever just, 2 years ago on animal reaction cases. Why hasn't anyone done this? The evidence is there. We have almost 1 million documented encounters. Almost 1 million. I think it's probably we do, but it'd be hard to count up between all the Europe and Russia and all the other South America. But in the US, it's hundreds of thousands.
Preston, it's always great to have you on. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Charlotte. I always get all fired up on this subject.
We got to get you back on to talk about you. What I would like to talk about next time is that sighting that happened at that school.
Schoolyard.
To talk about that schoolyard sighting, if you're willing to come back.
I would love that. That's my favorite aspect of all of this. The schoolyard. I wrote a book on it, as you know.
Yeah, that's why I like to talk about
it. Yeah, let's do it.
That's a fascinating case. What's next for you?
Oh, I'm working on. Just had a new book put out. Not From Here, Volume 5.
There we go.
So that's a 5-volume set. Working on Symmetry. Number 2, here's Symmetry, probably my favorite book I've written because it's just one amazing story.
You're always so busy.
I'm going to put out one on out-of-body experiences. There's more UFO books coming. Got one on the supernatural, another word that's not my favorite, but I'm certainly studying it. I'm busy, Charlotte. I've always got a book ready to go.
There you go. All righty then. Where can people find you, sir?
You can find me all over social media. I'm pretty easy to find. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Got a website, PrestonDennett.weebly.com. Got a YouTube channel. Books are available online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online retailers. So, easy to find. You can always love hearing from people, too, if they want to reach out. So,
Fantastic. Well, we'll get you back on. I'll be back in touch with you so we can talk about the schoolyards.
Yay. I look forward to it.
All right. Have a great rest of your evening.
Sure will. You too.
And thank you once again.
Always.
Okay, bye. It's always great to have him on. Learned so much about these cases. I can understand that. I mean, there's a lot of deep water out there. Like I said, the coastline, people don't realize how steep that is. When you think of California coastline, that's rugged, everybody thinks of Big Sur, but it's interesting when you fly off the continent, because that's what we are, right? So you fly off, and you look back, and you see how steep the drop-off is. It's just incredible. Okay, tomorrow we're kind of shifting gears. My guest is going to be A.W. Finnegan. And Mr. Finnegan has had Lyme disease all his life. He contracted it along with his mother. And he did a lot of research and found that the possibility that a certain German or Russian scientist had been in the United States working on different bioweapons. And one of the bioweapons had to do with ticks and Lyme disease. And he feels somewhere along the line that the Lyme disease somehow got released in the United States, and that's why you come out across a lot of people that have Lyme disease. So we're going to be talking with him tomorrow at this usual time, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. So it should be an interesting show. All right. I'll show you Preston's contact information and some of his books and where to get them, and that sort of thing towards the end. I apologize, I haven't felt well all day, so I'm kind of off today, but. Yes, we'll try. We'll see if we can get Preston back in. If not the end of this month, maybe towards the mid next month, to talk about that those UFO sightings and the alien sightings at the schools, because that was a fascinating story as well. But I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And as I always like to say, if you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. Equal opportunity here. We're just trying to get the word out about our little old show. And you guys on the RSS feed, and you guys over YouTube, everybody's doing their job. I mean, we're gaining. We're always gaining. It's a slow gain, but it's a good gain. Slow gains are good gains. So we are gaining. So I really appreciate that. If you like what you saw today, leave us a thumbs up, a happy face, a heart. Show me some love. Show me some love. Anyhow, here's Preston's information, and we'll call it a night afterwards. Here we go. Who's got the button? There's the button. Okay, again, the website is prestondennett.weebly.com. And he does have some books out, so Mysteries, Legends, Unexplained Phenomena, and Undersea UFO Base. You've got Schoolyard UFO Encounters, and that's what I want to talk to him about. Onboard UFO Encounters. And UFOs at the drive-in. Plus, he's got a bunch of other ones. You need to get onto his website, or you need to get over to Amazon and check out all the books he has, because he has a lot of books out. And of course, like I said, Amazon, check out his website. All right, guys, I'll see you guys tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, with A.W. Finnegan, and we'll be talking about Lyme disease as a bioweapon. See you tomorrow.